Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Dan Martell with us. Dan, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Bronson.
Absolutely. Now, Dan, you really don't need much of an introduction for the people that hang around growth hacking circles, but just in case they don't know who you are, you're an investor, you're an entrepreneur, and you're probably the biggest startup celebrity to come out of Canada. But let's begin. What's that?
Celebrity is an interesting word, but
well, let's say startup celebrity, We have our own little sub-community, But let's talk about your current startup, Clarity. Clarity has actually been mentioned a number of times on this program. People come on, they talk about how they use Clarity and how it helped their startup and how it helped them grow. So tell us, what is Clarity?
So Clarity is the easiest way to schedule, find, and pay for expert advice over the phone to grow your business. So we have experts like Chris Brogan in the social media space, Eric Ries in Lean Startup. In the top growth hackers in the world, we probably have about 80% of them on Clarity. So, we've got 10,000 experts on Clarity. We've done 13,000 calls across 50 countries. So, and it's been around actually a year, May 4th, so not even a year yet. So, yeah. But it's just a marketplace for advice.
Yeah. Now you mentioned a guy like Eric Ries. So you're saying a nobody like me can call up Eric Ries for the right number.
You can schedule a call with Eric and he'll take it. Absolutely. People do it every day.
And that's just one of 10,000 people, high quality people that I can do that with. Yeah. So obviously the benefit of that is amazing. Anybody can see the win there. What made you want to start Clarity? I'm assuming it was some personal kind of thing going on there that you knew this was a need.
Yeah, there was two things that came together. One, I made a commitment to only work on another idea if I knew it had the potential to impact 1 billion people within a decade in a positive way. And then second, I wanted to solve a problem that was really meaningful. And when I started thinking about growing up, being an 18-year-old entrepreneur growing up in the middle of nowhere in Eastern Canada, I just thought, the most powerful thing I've learned over my entrepreneurial career was how to seek out and get great advice from people who have been there before. Yeah. And for those who may not have the ability to travel or didn't grow up in the right place, or maybe even just don't have the personality to kind of reach out and ask, I thought, how can I make that process accessible and open to anybody, regardless of where you live or what your social standings are? And that was my vision for Clarity.
Yeah, that's perfect. I can relate. I grew up in Kentucky, so middle of nowhere. There's no community talking about tech and startup stuff, so advice is well sought after. When I look at Clarity, it seems like it's almost doing what AngelList did for investing. It's doing for mentorship. Do you think that's accurate? It's kind of democratizing it, making it accessible.
Yeah, I feel like AngelList is an amazing product, and I aspire to have. There's a lot of things they do really well. A lot of the social filtering and they allow you to build profiles. We don't use the word mentoring because I think mentoring is definitely a personal thing, one-on-one. Charging somebody for that time is not a good fit for what Clarity is doing. What we're trying to do is help people make better decisions. So if you're tasked to do something for the first time ever from your boss or whoever, startups, it's just very natural. Like every time you get up to do something, that day, it's probably the first time you've ever done it.
Yeah.
So we just want to help you make better decisions by connecting with people who've been there before. So I definitely, think that we're filling that same space, but we're, the product's grown now. We're really half startup tech people, and then the other half, real estate investors, other types of industries like restaurants, et cetera, that are using the product. So we're really trying to connect with the 400 million entrepreneurs around the world.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple times there the goal to make right decisions. In startup circles, there's so much emphasis on execution, and there should be. Without execution, you don't get anything done. It doesn't matter. But does there need to be some emphasis on new ideas, good advice? I guess what I'm getting at is, can the right idea at the right time really lead to growth opportunities in your mind?
I think that there are opportunities, certain business ideas that, given, the landscape of the internet or whatever, are going to do well. The best advice I ever got from one of my advisors was, if you're going to go into an industry, make sure you pick one that's growing. And if you just do that, if you were like nobody in 2007, 2008 starting a social media product, you were going to grow 10, 20% year over year just because that's what the market was doing.
Yeah.
So there's this, saying says, high tides rise all boats. So trying to fight against that trend and getting into something like publishing would probably not be a great move. But yeah, I think timing definitely plays a big part. You could be too early or you can be too late. And if the markets are growing, you're going to inevitably grow with them.
Yeah. Now you mentioned earlier you have 10,000 experts on Clarity right now. So let's talk about the growth of Clarity a little bit. How do you get to 10,000 experts? Because people watching this, they're trying to grow a marketplace as well, maybe. How did you go from 1 to 10 to 1,000 to 10,000? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, so we actually do have some growth hacks that we've applied that I can't talk about, because if I did, then they wouldn't be very good if everybody was getting in front of those users. But I guess the framework I would suggest to the listeners is you want to figure out where your customers. So in a marketplace, you have supply and demand, right? So and that's true for any marketplace. And you got to treat both of them differently. They both have to get to product market fit. So the experts have needs, the members that are looking for advice have needs, and and sometimes they're totally different. But obviously, you got to get them together. On the expert side, you ask what makes a great expert. So somebody who's been there before, somebody that likes to give advice, somebody that's already out there sharing and communicating. So then you ask yourself, okay, well, where does that customer type exist? Where do they hang out? What are some of the characteristics? What are the artifacts that they generate? And just by saying what I just said, like, they're types of people that like to share, they like to give advice, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you can just imagine the different social networks that allow you to do that. So how are you going to source those people? Well, go find them. Go create a message that resonates and insert yourself into that conversation. And, that's what we did. We essentially said, who has access to these types of people, and how can we pull them off of those networks into Clarity?
Yeah. Now, what about the other side of the market? How are you acquiring the users? Because almost I think you can appeal to the ego of the experts and you can get people on board there. What do you do to get people to pay money to make a phone call that maybe aren't used to doing something like that?
Yeah, so the supply side is always the hardest, or the demand side is the hardest part. So a lot of people, they come to me and they're like, hey, we have, 1,000 listings. And I'm like, that's actually not interesting. It's how do you get anybody to activate. So in the early days of Clarity, we actually manually onboarded these experts and then worked with them to figure out how can we allow them to promote themselves to get the demand side. So that was a big one. So how do you build a product that allows your suppliers to actually generate demand on their own? Because if you have to do it all for them, then the economics actually don't work very well. And you got to do paid marketing or other types of demand generation. Economics don't work. So you have to figure out how do you allow them to actually amplify, their listing so that they can get introduce the product to other people. Okay. Honestly, all we've done on the supply side is just made a product that worked. Like, it sounds crazy, but I think a lot of marketplaces, they don't work very well. Like you said, you're telling me I can talk to Eric Ries? Yes. The part that's funny is that most people don't. So what I've been trying to do is just, how do you make a product that's more approachable? How do you introduce it to people in a way that doesn't seem scary? Everything from the request flow to scheduling, we've revamped it. It used to be like, you posted a request and the person would call you whenever they were free. Well, that wasn't very good. It didn't feel good. And we've added scheduling, and we're doing a bunch of stuff around it so that we can allow people to experience the product with a very little commitment. And we have not done anything on the growth hacking for the demand side. We've just really focused on a great expert experience, make sure that they got activated and onboarded, and then figure out how can we make the product not feel scary for the demand side.
Yeah, I can attest that the product has a great feel to it. And it's almost it's interesting how the design feels. It feels like a mobile app on a big screen in a good way. Like, it's simple and intuitive, So
some people think that that's really clever, and I'll tell you the secret behind that. It was lack of so we got rejected from Apple on the App Store. We were going to launch mobile first, and we were launching in 4 days, and we said, what can we do? And we essentially just unbundled the iOS app with the front end and just deployed it like that. And it actually, for the last year, it's worked really well. Yeah. So it wasn't intentional, and we're actually working on a new version of the product that's going to have a desktop view and a mobile view and a tablet view. So thanks for the feedback, that you like it, because a lot of people do, but it's definitely not... I wouldn't recommend it. And it's funny because I've seen people copy us not knowing why we did that.
That's awesome.
It's not the way to build an app. It's confusing. People, the amount of emails I get to support saying, I think I'm stuck on your mobile version of your app, is not worth the headaches.
That's great. Now, you mentioned earlier you wanted to get involved. You weren't going to get involved in a startup unless you could have 1 billion people using it in 10 years. And you think Clarity has that potential. I know entrepreneurs have to talk like that. They have to get the team riled up. They have to make a buzz in the marketplace. Do you really think 1 billion people could use Clarity? And if so, what are you going to have to do to get there? Because you're going to have to do some big plays to kind of make that happen.
Yeah, so I think that you can say something a magnitude smaller and still get the team excited. So the reason why I chose 1 billion was, and again, it's not 1 billion people using it, it's a positive impact on 1 billion people.
It could be a
right?
company of a number of people being affected by a phone call.
Exactly. So with Clarity, I mean, the economics, the math is, if we can get 10 million entrepreneurs a year talking to each other or getting advice from other really smart people, and they go off and build companies, that's 1 billion people. They create services that, entrepreneurs, in essence, every day make the world a better place for all of us to enjoy.
Yeah.
Like that is the definition of entrepreneurship. They don't exist if they don't create and solve a problem. And by solving problems, you make the world better for everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's our mission, and 100% we think we can get there. I mean, a decade's a long time. I think a lot of people overestimate what they can get done in a year and underestimate what they can get done in 10. And we're just starting, and we're only a year in, and there's compounding effects as you go along. The big trends that we are riding is the mobile, so making sure that we're on every device and we're riding the mobile trend. I think Instagram's a great example of a company that, even though their product was great, they rode the iOS growth curve. Mm-hmm. We're going to do the same thing. And then social media and identity and reputation online they're all kind of trending growth factors that we're taking advantage of right now. Collaborative consumption is another kind of theme right now that seems to be getting a lot of steam that we're part of. I don't see any issues. I mean, what are the things we're going to have to do? Just keep building a product that's more engaging and build features that allow our users to share their experience with their friends.
Yeah. You said something in the middle there that I want you to unpack for us, because I think it's such good advice for growing a startup. You overestimate what you can get done in a year and underestimate what you can get done in 10 years. Go into that a little bit deeper. What do you mean by that? How do they overestimate? How do they underestimate? And what does that have to do with growth?
Yeah, well, I mean, the easiest way to explain it is I'm now on my 3rd company. So I started a company called Spheric Technologies. Over 4 years, built it, grew it to 30 people, got acquired in 2008, then moved to San Francisco in 2009, started Flowtown. 2 years later, raised capital, grew that, sold that one in October 2011. And I've been on to Clarity now for, so it's been live a little under a year, but started January 2012. And, we've raised 1.6 million. Our growth is doing really well. And that's all been done within 9 years. So I started Spheric when I was 24. I'm 33 now. So, I think that's a lot in 9 years, right? So, I mean, I think a lot of people, if you just focused on one, right? I just plan on focusing on Clarity for the next, decade plus. People don't realize there's these compounding effects if you stick with one idea and really push it, the domain expertise that you build and the velocity and the network and the relationships. And I think most people don't plan far out enough, and it's just a really healthy thing to do.
Yeah, a long view of what you can get done is really a competitive advantage, because you don't get depressed in year one, and you realize that the compounding effects that you talked about, a lot can happen in year 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 if you just don't get down to the dumps in year one. You got to push through.
And I'll say that it's usually year 3 when things actually start working. Most people don't realize this, but if you ask any business owner, when did things stop feeling scary? It's usually year 3 and 4 where receivables started, growth started happening, organic word of mouth, all that energy and marketing and you put up front started paying off. So, if you just stick it out to year 3 or 4, I think you'll be happy, and then the rest of it is just growth.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I started my company about 3 or 4 years ago, and I feel like this is the first time I have any clue what I'm doing. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, throughout your career, you've kind of gained a reputation for being a great marketer. With Flowtown, the last one, it was a marketing play, and you grew that substantially, sold it. With Clarity, it's got a lot of buzz, it's got a lot of steam. You're marketing that very well. So let me ask you, kind of high level, what do you know about startup growth that others just neglect or miss? What's one of those things that you just get that allows you to kind of do this repetitively?
The one thing I think that I spend a lot more time than most people on is really perfecting the product messaging. So what does clarity do? I mean, everybody in my team will be able to tell you that, we help you make faster decisions. We build, schedule, pay for expert advice over the phone to grow your business. Like, I think a lot of startups actually don't know how to describe what they do. And they do it almost as a FOMO, so fear of missing out, right? I invested in a company that's an amazing company, amazing product. They just raised a bunch of money, and I was talking with the entrepreneur, and he doesn't want to say this one thing because they do 3. And I'm like, I mean, you can't pick 2 at most, but 3, and it doesn't feel good. And internally, he knows it, right? Like I said, let's play this role-playing game. Like, what if you were giving advice to somebody in a similar situation as you? What would you say to them? And he says it, and then I go, exactly. So I think that I just spend a lot of time on positioning and messaging, and the thing that happens is when you really get clear about what you do and what you don't do, then the market knows how to share that message, and that's where growth happens. I think, a lot of people think growth is marketing tactics, and I think growth is growth hacking is a product thing. It's not a marketing thing, right? Like, I spend most of my time on product because I don't want to spend anything on paid channels because I need to understand that the product itself will work first. And step 1 is, what do you do? And then walk people to get to that moment of gratification. Like, if I say it helps you get on a phone call, if you don't get on a phone call, then I've failed, right? And like, everything I do is to trying to get you to that point where you feel the product working. And then after that, you try to do retention engagement stuff. But most people don't really say, okay, here's what we do for our customers. Let's put that on the homepage. And let's make sure everything after that gets them to feel that as soon as possible. I mean, just think about like compound interest, right? If you sign up for a product and they say they solve this problem, but you don't feel that until 2 weeks later, if all the company did was figured out how to introduce that and make you feel that within a week, within a day, within hours of signing up, they're going to have compound growth just by fixing that. And it has nothing to do with clever marketing or social sharing or anything else. It's just making sure that what you say your product does, you can deliver on the promise as soon as possible.
Yeah, no, I like what you just did there, because we've had people on the show before talk about, copywriting, communicating the message, positioning, kind of the meme of your idea that's going to spread, but no one's then connected the dot into the product and saying, how fast into the product can we make them know that tagline is true, and how often can we make it true to get that compounding interest? So I think that's the new insight that I've never heard. And it helps me. Like, I've never really thought about it. How fast can I make my promise true in the product? So that's great. I love that.
It's velocity. It's compound interest.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this. Another kind of high-level question as a marketer. How much of a startup's growth is strategy and product, as you say, and how much of it is circumstance? Because before you mentioned, when the tide rises, all the boats rise, that kind of thing. How much is each? I mean, can you take a great product with a bad marketer and win? Can you take a great marketer with a bad product and win? I mean, how does that work?
Well, so I mean, that's when you ask that question, it's under the assumption that the product doesn't change, right? And I don't think that any entrepreneur is going to sit here and tell you that their ideas never change. It changes every day, if not, every hour. You might learn something new. So to me, it's can you take an idea and iterate around it to make it good? Of course. And I think what I've learned is I actually have no clue how I'm going to get to 10 million entrepreneurs using clarity every day. All I believe in and I have 100% faith in is the process that's getting me the success I've had in the past that continues to get me. Like, all I need to believe is that I will learn faster than any other competitor, any other opportunity in the market, and I will win. So what are things you can do to learn faster? How can you instrument the product so that you learn faster? How can you introduce the customer to the benefit faster? All those things are really the question of, can you make a bad product great? Of course, but you just got to be willing to change, because there's a reason why it's not great. And if it's not great, you're probably not solving a problem that a customer has, and you've got to pivot. So if your messaging's off, you can fix that. If the product doesn't deliver on the benefit you promise on the homepage, fix that. If it doesn't retain people, you just keep tweaking and fixing and iterating, but you got to make sure you instrument and you understand where the funnel's broken or where the engagement's broken. And, we've gotten to the point now where we actually survey in the product to ask our users what information's missing for you to make a better decision on this page. And they tell us. So we get 500 responses. We look at the data. They tell us what they need. we add it. So we don't even have to be that clever anymore in regards to how do we optimize the product. We've just gotten clever about the process that we use to learn.
Yeah, and when you talk about that process, you exude a confidence when you say, how are we going to get to 10 million, every week or every day or every month, whatever it was, and you say, I don't know, but I know the process works, I know it's going to work, I know I'm going to make it happen. So let me ask you about this. Looking at your history, kind of when you were younger, you went through a considerable amount as a young man. You overcame a lot as a young man, and it really showed a lot of grit, not just to survive what you went through, but to really thrive now in your 30s, being the guy you are. How much is grit a part of growing a startup? Because when you say, I don't know how we get to 10 million a month, but we will, I mean, that's grit. And that's something a lot of people can't say and actually mean it, but I actually think you mean it when you say it. How important is grit to growing a startup?
I mean, how important is having faith when nothing else, no other indication tells you that you should? It is what being an entrepreneur is about. But I think what's helps over the years, and I learned at a very young age, how to believe in a process or believe in something that you just have faith, and then you get these little moments of reassurance, and then you're like, wow, okay, that's working. I'm going to keep doing it. And I think the best way to fast track that as an entrepreneur is spend time with other successful entrepreneurs. You will learn in those hour lunch sessions or coffee meetings that they are not that smart. They're not Einstein. They're not geniuses. I am not, brilliant. Mm-hmm. I just surround myself with smart people. I ask really good questions. I take action. I don't think about it. And I realize that 2 times out of 3, I'm going to be wrong. But that 1 time is going to be so good that it's going to make up for the other 2. And I just got to get there faster. And that is the thing, is that we need to have confidence for our team, but it's based on reality that other people have the same uncertainty and doubt, and that's okay. Those are healthy things to have. You don't want to be like blindly walking around thinking everything's going to be great and you're not doing anything. But if you take action and you get real feedback from customers, then those are validation points, either proving right or wrong, that are going to give you that confidence to keep moving forward. And that's the process that I talked about. I just know that the best thing I can do every day is understand from our users' point of view, by talking to them, by looking at their actions, how to solve problems that they're telling me by just looking at the numbers.
Yeah. Over and over in what you just said, you mentioned process, actions, doing something. 2 out of 3 will fail. It's almost like as long as you're moving forward, you're moving, and as long as you're learning while you're moving, you're doing fine. So that's the thing, is just grit is the thing that allows you to do something even when it might fail. You just keep doing it, it seems like.
There's a great quote that kind of summarizes, you can't learn to surf by reading a book.
That's awesome.
Right? Like, you got to stop reading the blog posts and you just got to get out and do a startup, and you got to talk to customers and all those things. Like, you can educate yourself to death, but you actually didn't learn anything because it was never in a scenario that had a feedback loop. Mm-hmm. It was just very one-way consumption. And I'm all about, I heard somebody say the other day, it's like, well, we could spend 2 days talking about how it would work, or spend 2 days doing it to learn how it's working. Right? And
exactly.
To me, if it takes less time to actually implement and prototype than to talk about it, just do that and then get some real data.
Yeah, and I think that's why success favors those with grit, because grit helps you learn. Academic learning alone is not enough anymore, and grit's the thing that allows you to put yourself out there, be wrong, and learn from it. So I think that's great advice. Now, you're also an investor and a mentor to a lot of startups, so you kind of get a window into what startups are thinking, what they're doing, kind of the pulse on what's going on with a lot of younger people starting these things. What are some early indications to you that a startup has growth potential? I think I might know what you're going to say based on what you said before, but go ahead.
So who I invest in, it's always the people first, right? I got to trust them, and it sucks for people that want to pitch me now. They might be listening, like, oh, I'm going to reach out to Dan. Like, I need to know you, and it takes 3 or 4 months for me to get to know you, and we have to be around each other or exchange ideas. So, I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time in San Francisco and meeting thousands of entrepreneurs every year, just at speaking at events. So I actually have enough inbound flow of deals just by that network that I don't need people cold emailing me. If you feel like doing it, you can try.
They will. They will.
I'm not like an investor because I'm trying to make money. I do it purely based on personal, I enjoy this person's ideas, what they're building. I can see myself as a customer. What do I look for growth opportunities? I mean, to me, it's a product that retains their users. So retention is the first one. Like, I don't really care much about monetization. I want to know that you have an idea and it's based on fundamentals from an industry that's well thought out. So if you have like advertising as your primary monetization, well, those channels and different types of ad products have been thought out. So you can just assume if you have this size of an audience, how much money you're gonna make. What I care more about is like, show me who's using the product and how are they using it and how often are they using it? Because if you have retention, then you can improve growth. If you have no retention, then growth is going to be a losing battle because you have a bucket with big holes in it.
Yeah, makes sense. As you talk to these startups, I'm sure you feel like you're repeating yourself often because a lot of times they need to know the same thing and it's the same thing they don't know. What advice do you find yourself kind of giving just over and over? What's the broken record of Dan that just keeps playing to startups when they come around about growth specifically?
So I heard a quote yesterday actually that said most people don't need to learn something new. They just need to be reminded of what they already know. So I think a lot of times when I'm talking to these entrepreneurs, I'm not saying anything they don't know. I'm just helping them essentially reinforce what they know they should do it and what order, right? I think right action, right time is really important. Some people spend time and money on things in the beginning that just don't matter. And that's why they don't figure it out in time. Startups die because they don't have enough time to figure it out. So figuring out what you do now versus later is actually probably the most important thing that I do at startups. But, the thing that I feel like we talk a lot about is, if it's a marketplace like a Clarity or GetAround or Udemy, it's, what's the supply side product market fit? Like, what's in it for them? What do they need to figure out? And then what's on the demand side? So there's PM fit and marketplaces on both sides. And there's diagrams and metrics that you need to instrument for both to understand them. So usually in the beginning when after I invest in a company, it's just instrumenting those kind of funnels so that we have some visualization and understand where the opportunity lies. And then really it's just saying, okay, what's the biggest opportunity? Where's the biggest drop in our funnels? And let's just start fixing those. And once those are fixed in the product, then we go look at top of funnel and say, how can we introduce more users to the product? But there's no point in doing top of the funnel until you make sure that the funnel is actually working. And it's twice as hard if you're doing a marketplace. So I don't think there's any one specific thing. It's more helping them understand the data that I feel like there's not a lot of good information on that. It's like, okay, I've instrumented everything using Kissmetrics or Mixpanel, and now what should I be spending my time on? I actually have visibility, but I don't know how to understand the information. I feel like that's the part that I spend a lot of time helping startups with.
Yeah. You mentioned that they focus on the wrong things early on when they should be focused on those later, or vice versa. Give us some examples of those. What's something that young startups just really want to focus on that's completely irrelevant until they cross certain milestones?
Absolutely. I mean, the number one would be getting corner store, like big customers, name brand companies to use your product, or getting press, right? Like launching, I invested in a company a couple months ago, and as soon as the deal was done, they announced it. And I was like, whoa, what happened? Why? Why? And they were like, oh, well, one of our major investors wanted to announce it. I go, that's great, but that's their motivation. They wanted to get the word out so that they could seem like they invest in smart companies. But your product isn't even launched yet. So where's the value to you? You just lost it all. And you only have one chance to make a first impression. You got to make sure that you're very strategic about when you do that so that you can get, a consistent amount of users to your product. I mean, the number I always tell entrepreneurs is get 50 new signups a day, right? Every day. And I say that quickly and they're like, well, how do you do that? It's hard, but if you know that all you need to do is get 350 people every week sign up for your product, and that's enough people to test flows, to test feedback, then that's what you got to do. And you can do that through content marketing. You can do it through the product. You can do it through press, well-timed press at a certain interval. You can do it through, influencer networks. You can just figure out okay, well, I'm going to spend 20% of my time on these things that are going to help with the top of the funnel. But once I get to this level, I'm done, and I'm going to work on retention. When retention's good, then I'm going to work back on top of the funnel again, right?
Okay.
Those are the kind of things that I think about, that I see a lot of startups spend time and energy on the wrong things, right?
Yeah. So you acquire enough users, not because you're in acquisition mode, just to figure out the data of the funnel. Once the holes are plugged, then you go back to acquisition phase for real and dump maybe paid money into it, time into it, resources into it, because now the funnel's solid, you're not going to lose people.
Yeah, and I mean, you only want to test paid channels once you understand LTV. Well, you need some amount of data to understand lifetime value. You need to charge in your product to understand lifetime value. So if you're doing any paid acquisition and you have no monetary payment in your product, you're doing it backwards.
Okay. Now, it seems like that process is going to take more than a weekend. I mean, the process you just laid out, I mean, it's going to be a long-term kind of process before you really get to the place where you're trying to grow as quick as possible. So do you see startups just want to grow fast when they're just...
Well, so I mean, I think it's really healthy to have goals, right? So, Paul Graham recently wrote, if you're not growing 10% week over week, then you're not growing a venture-backed startup. And I agree that growth is one of the key factors, but I think more importantly, and you want that kind of growth just to have enough users, right? The 350 users a day, I mean, if you're doing 10% week over week, it should only take you 2 to 3 months to get to that volume. And then you should stop and make sure the product's working. Because if you get addicted, and there was a post recently on one of the designers at FormSpring, and I know the founder, Ade, at FormSpring, and they came out and they did this. And I think they got addicted or this urgency to keep the hockey stick when they should have took the energy that they were investing in trying to keep this happening and say, how do we stop people from churning, right? And if they would have done that after, then they could have spent time again. Maybe they wouldn't have the outcome that they had where they had to shut it down. I don't know, right? I mean, giving other people advice on their startups is the stupidest thing in the world because I don't know anything about their circumstance or context, and it makes it absolutely irrelevant. And I always apologize when I do even hint to knowing anything because I hate when people do it to me. But I think, yeah, you should spend 2 or 3 or 4 months, but have the goal, right? Let's get to 50 signups. Let's get a retention to 20% week over week for those cohorts. Let's focus on paid acquisition that generates, and just have those goals. And then one of the tricks I think that's interesting that we do that I don't see very often is we measure our goals on a weekly basis. And the reason why is if you set yearly goals, you get one chance a year to realign, right? Now, people laugh, but most people have no goals. So once a year is better than nothing. So most startups have none. They just every day get up and decide, I'm going to just try stuff. And then better than that's quarterly, right? So you set the goals at the beginning of the quarter and you try to hit them. Most people, if they're smart, they do monthly. But you only get 12 shots a year on readjusting. With weekly, we actually get 52 times a year to sit down as a team and say, here's what's important, here's what we think we can do to improve it, here are the actions, let's build, test, measure, learn, and iterate 52 times a year. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we've had success is, we reassess every Sunday. And our clock stops at Saturday night at 8 p.m. We know if we hit goal or didn't, and then we sit down on Sunday and say, what did we learn? What did we not get in fast enough?
Yeah, that's great. Are there any myths about growth that you want to debunk? Any, kind of old wives' tales that float around about growth that you hear in startup circles? You can say, yeah, that's not true.
So I will say growth hacking. So I used to call it metrics-based marketing. That's where I got my teeth cut in. I spent a lot of times on metric-based marketing. It was predominantly product marketing. And then there's this thing called growth hacking that all of a sudden started taking off. And, I think the biggest myth is that people think it has to do with any paid channels. Like growth hacking has nothing to do with paid. It has everything to do with product. And in product, you have 2 types of things. You can either use OPN, which is other people's networks. So YouTube did that with MySpace, Facebook, Airbnb did it with Craigslist. And there's, PayPal with eBay. And there's a bunch of examples of OPN, right? And then the other one is shareable moments. Like what in your product can you give to a user to share with somebody else? And I mean, a good example people use all the time is Dropbox referral. But most people don't understand that the referral invite for Dropbox only works because the person giving the invite gets value and then the other person receiving gets more value that they could have not gotten if they didn't get the invite from the person. Asking somebody just invite your friend is not going to work. Doing it the way Dropbox is going to work. Another brilliant one is AngelList. AngelList has these references and people you've worked with and customers now, and they ask you to insert their email to verify. Well, how great is that? Every time you build your profile, you might have 10 different people points that you're then inviting to confirm on AngelList, and if they don't have an account, they got to create an account. I mean, brilliant. So or Hootsuite when they added the team accounts where you can invite your teammates to collaborate around a social account. I mean, that's brilliant, right? It's like project management software where you invite people to collaborate, or invoicing software where you invoice a customer and they can pay you through the system. Like, anytime you can share the product with somebody else and it's really natural and logical to do that. So, I mean, between the OPN and the shareable moments, there's a lot of opportunities that every product can look into to figure out how can they make the product grow. But going back to the beginning, it only works if you can get people to experience the benefit right off the bat. So it's kind of like, there's these things you got to do in a certain order, and those are the ways that I think about it: is get people to experience the product, and then figure out how do you make the product grow using those two strategies, those buckets of ideas. And then once that's well tuned, then you do paid channels. But the biggest mistake I see people is like, okay, well, we're gonna growth hack using Twitter's new ad platform or StumbleUpon or whatever. It's like, paid marketing doesn't work. Content marketing's paid. If you pay people to write content, it's paid. So don't kid yourself on that one either.
No, it's great. Do you know of any examples of maybe lesser known startups that you think are just getting marketing right and getting growth right? Maybe they're not well known because they haven't hit scale yet, but there's something going on there.
Well, the one I liked recently that I saw was Buffer. So Buffer app lets you, set up schedules for when you share stuff. And I started using the product, and they prompted me. I think after 3 weeks, they noticed that I had a blog with a lot of traffic, and they offered to give me a free membership to the pro account if I inserted the Buffer share button on my blog. And I thought that was just brilliant, right? Because clearly people that like the product for Buffer, again, when we talk about like, where do my customers hang out? If people are sharing and tweeting stuff, they probably have an online presence. They probably have a blog. Now, what Buffer does, I'm assuming, is they rank order the people using the product that have a blog and say, who are the top 5% that if we actually gave them a pro account, I mean, it costs us $10 a month lost revenue. Is it worth getting the distribution of having that button on those blogs, right? And I think that's just really smart. So, I mean, that's one that really stood out recently. Another one is Health Tap, which is in the health space, so health at your fingertips. So they're really trying to revolutionize that. I mean, their flows around every Q&A that they do, they have a photo, and I don't know who sets the photo. If the doctor, when they answer the question, sets the photo, or if they do it internally, but they add a photo and they restrict the answer to short answer and long answer. So the short answer is actually the answer, and then the longer version. And by doing that, they allow you to have social share buttons that are really value added because it's super intuitive. So I can pin it to Pinterest, I can share it on Facebook, and it has a photo. So like those little things that either they built into the interface or whatever, they're taking these moments and allowing you to share it, but they're optimizing the sharing. So I thought that was really clever as well.
No, those are great, examples, and they use the two things you talked about: shareable moments in the app, and leveraging other people's networks with Buffer. So it's kind of two examples showing the two things that you've already told us about. So Dan, this has been an awesome interview. I got one last question for you. What's the best advice, kind of high level, that you can give any startup that's attempting to acquire, retain, monetize, just grow their startup?
Wow, so blanket question.
Take it any direction you want.
I would say instrument your retention and understand where it's at today. I think most startups have no clue where the retention is, and if they actually looked at it, they'd probably be pretty sad to find out after 7 or 8 weeks their users go to zero. So if that's the case and it goes to zero retention, that means every 7 weeks you need to gain 100% of the existing users you already got, and 110% if you want to grow. And it's just crazy, but that's what people do every day.
Yeah, that's great advice. This has been an awesome interview. Dan, thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Hey, absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.